New York doesn't just go quiet on its own. Someone's gotta make it happen. And that night, I was the reason the city held its breath. You ever hear a city hold its breath? It's a funny thing, the hum of life, the horns, the drunk slogan outside some gin joint, all of it gone. Not slow, not gradual. Like somebody reached over and turned the volume knob all the way down. That night, I was that somebody. See, back in those days, the Lower East Side had a rhythm. Every street had its own song, the shuffle of shoes on wet pavement, the hiss of steam from the grates, the faint tap-tap-tap of some guy working late in a tailor shop. It was a dirty kind of music, but it was ours. And when I walked those streets, people noticed. Not 'cause I was loud, not 'cause I was flashy. Nah. They noticed 'cause I was the kind of man you didn't look at too long. You caught my reflection in a store window, you kept walking. You heard my name in a backroom, you lowered your voice. That's the way I liked it. The rain had just started, the kind that slicks the cobblestone like a mirror. Street lamps glowed like little halos, the neon from the corner bar bleeding red into the puddles. My coat was buttoned tight, hat pulled low. A cigarette burned between my fingers, the smoke curling up into the cold air. On the corner by Delancey, a group of young punks leaned against a lamppost, Logan too loud like they owned the night. They saw me comin'. Their laughter died halfway through a sentence. They didn't run, not exactly. But their feet found somewhere else to be. That's power, kid. The kind you can't buy in a store, can't learn in a book. It ain't about being the biggest guy in the room. It's about making the room smaller so everyone's in your shadow. Inside the old bar on Rivington, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. A card game was running in the back. I stepped in, every head turning just enough to notice, then just enough to pretend they didn't. A man in my business doesn't need to raise his voice. My presence was enough to change the temperature of the room. I wasn't here to start trouble. Trouble, see, that comes on its own, no matter how much you try to keep your hands clean. I was here to send a message. Not with a knife. Not with a gun. With silence. There's a trick to it, you let people see you in a place they don't expect you to be. You don't smile, you don't nod. You just exist. You let the thought bloom in their heads, why's he here? Who's he here for? The not knowing is worse than the truth. An old friend of mine, Tommy, was behind the bar that night. He slid me a glass without a skin. On the house, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I didn't drink it. Just left it there, condensation running down the side, a little pool of water gathering at the base. Every second I stayed, the room got quieter. Every second they wondered who'd be left standing when I walked out. That's the thing people never understand about power, the real kind. It's not in what you do. It's in what people think you're gonna do. After 10 minutes, I lit another cigarette, left the first one still smoldering in the ashtray. I stood, adjusted my coat, and walked out. Didn't look back. By the time I hit the sidewalk, you could have heard a mouse breathe in that bar. The rain was coming down harder now, hitting my hat brim, running down the back of my neck. I walked slow, not 'cause I was tired, but because I wanted the night to remember me. Every closed door, every window with the curtain just barely pulled back, every shadow that shifted when I passed, they all knew I'd been there. And here's the part they didn't know, I wasn't even here for them. This was just the warm-up. The real reason I was out that night? I was about to lay down the first of my rules, the one that would build everything that came after. But I ain't gonna give you that just yet. No. You gotta understand the streets before you can understand the code. Because once you know how the city breathes, you'll know exactly how to make it stop. Before they called me lucky, I was just Salvatore, a street kid who learned quick that the rules were different when you were poor. The name on my birth papers? Salvatore Lucania. Has a nice ring to it, don't it? Problem is, in the streets I grew up on, nice rings didn't mean nothing. Names were like coats, you wore one till it didn't fit anymore, then you found one that did. I was born in Sicily, Lurkura Fritti. A place with more dust than dreams, where the hills roll on forever and the air smells like the earth itself. My father, he wasn't a rich man. Not poor enough to beg, not rich enough to matter. But me? I had a different itch. I wasn't gonna die in some sunburned field with dirt under my nails and no one knowing my name. In 1906, we packed up a family of 7 and boarded a ship bound for New York City. You ever been on a boat like that? The stink of sweat and sickness, babies crying, mothers humming old songs to keep from thinking about how far from home they were. I was 9 years old, but I felt like I'd aged 10 years before we even saw the Statue of Liberty. When we hit Ellis Island, I thought we'd made it. Turns out, America wasn't a golden door, it was a hallway full of locked rooms. And if you didn't have the key, well, you better know how to pick a lock. We ended up in East Harlem. Back then, they called it Italian Harlem. But to me, it was just the block, crowded tenements stacked like matchboxes, wash lines strung across the alleys, kids with bare feet kicking a ragball through puddles of God knows what. The air was thick with garlic from kitchens and the smoke of cheap coal. I learned quick, school was for the ones who could afford to waste the daylight. I had to bring home money. Shirneen shoes, sellin' papers, runnin' errands for the corner grocer. Pennies a day, but pennies were something. And every penny taught me the same lesson: the man with the most rules usually had the least to eat. The streets had their own rules, different from the ones the priests preached or the teachers rattled off. Out there, you didn't win by being the strongest. You won by being the smartest, or the quietest, or the one who knew which fights not to pick. By 12, I was already working 4 street gangs. Mostly errands, watching corners, passing notes, keeping my mouth shut. And let me tell ya, keeping your mouth shut? That was my first real skill. One night, I'm coming home from a job, 2 older kids step out from an alley. They tell me to hand over the coins I made. I tell them, you want M? You'll have to take M. It wasn't bravado. I knew they could beat me bloody. But I also knew something they didn't. Meyer Lansky was watching from across the street. And Meyer? Meyer didn't like bullies. That was the first night Meyer and I spoke. Funny, huh? 2 skinny kids from different worlds, me from Sicily, him from Poland, standing in the gutter, sharing a busted cigarette like we were old men in a cafe. We talked about how the streets worked, who was making the real money, how the guys fighting over nickels were the same guys who'd never touch a dollar. That's when I started thinking different. I didn't just want to survive the streets, I wanted to own them. But before I could do that, I needed something more than a sharp mind. I needed a name. See, Salvatore Lucania was too long for the coppers to remember, but just long enough for M to write down on an arrest sheet. And I wasn't about to make it easy for M. They started calling me lucky after a scrape in my late teens. Some say it was 'cause I survived a knife attack from a gang in Little Italy. Others say it's 'cause I had a habit of winning card games I shouldn't. Truth is, I let M wonder. Mystery is worth more than the truth in this line of work. Lucky Luciano, that's the name that fit. Short. Sharp. Rolled off the tongue like a coin hitting the counter. But the name was just the start. I had to back it up. And the way I did that, well, that's where the first real rule came from. A rule I'd carry my whole life. But before you hear it, you gotta know how the 5 points worked. Because once you step into that neighborhood, kid, you ain't walking out the same person. And that is where the real story begins. The first rule? Never let a man think he's got the upper hand, even if you gotta let him win once in a while. You ever hear of the 5 points? Not the neat little square they put in history books, I'm talking about the real thing. Early 1900s, where Chinatown kissed Little Italy, and the Irish kept one hand on your shoulder while the other lifted your wallet. It smelled like horses and sweat in the summer, like coal smoke and cheap gin in the winter. The cobblestones were slick with rain, blood, or both, depending on the day. It was the kind of place where you could buy a loaf of bread, a pocketknife, and a hit on a guy all on the same block. That's where I cut my teeth. The 5 Points gang, they weren't saints, but they were smart. Led by Paul Kelly, a guy who could quote Shakespeare in the morning and order a beating by lunch. Kelly ran things like a business, and that appealed to me. Violence wasn't just about sending a message, it was about maintaining a balance. You didn't waste muscle on a guy who couldn't hurt you back. When I first came in, I wasn't anybody. Just another kid with quick hands and a quicker mouth. But I kept my eyes open. And here's the thing about men, they hate losing, but they hate being played for a fool even more. One night, Kelly had us run in a high-stakes poker game in the back of a pool hall. The air was thick with cigar smoke, glasses clinking, the low murmur of guys pretending they weren't about to ruin their rent money. I was there to watch the door. Easy gig. But then I see this guy, Frankie Two Dimes, a hothead with more nerve than brains, start getting loud at the table. He's losing hand after hand, blaming the dealer, slamming his fist on the felt. Now, in a room like that, tempers can turn into bullets in about 2 seconds. So I walked over, leaned down, and told Frankie something soft, just for him. Maybe it's your night to win one. I slipped him a card under the table. He played it, won the hand. His whole mood changed, suddenly he's smiling, buying drinks, forgetting he was about to start a war. Paul Kelly saw the whole thing. After the game, he called me into the back. I thought I was about to get chewed out for meddling. Instead, he pours me a glass of whiskey and says, "You know why that was smart, kid? 'Cause sometimes you let a man feel tall, and he'll spend the rest of the night telling everyone how fair you are. That's worth more than talking his last nickel." That's when it hit me, the first rule: never let a man think he's got the upper hand, even if you gotta let him win once in a while. From then on, I started using it everywhere: negotiations, street games, even with the cops. You give them something small so they never look too hard for the big thing you're keeping for yourself. My reputation grew. I wasn't the biggest bruiser in the gang, but I was the guy who could talk you into handing over your wallet and thank me for talking it. Kelly liked that. He started bringing me into bigger jobs, union rackets, protection schemes, the kind of deals where the money was clean enough to spend, but dirty enough to get you killed if you bragged. It was in those smoky backrooms, sitting at Kelly's table, that I learned the difference between a street thug and a businessman. A thug takes what's in front of him. A businessman waits till you hand it to him and then makes you feel good about it. By the time I was 20, I wasn't just a kid in the gang anymore. I was a man with a name people remembered. And in this business, a name was a weapon sharper than any knife. But see, weapons attract enemies. And enemies? They're just friends waiting for the right moment to change sides. That's why the first rule mattered. Keep everyone feeling like they're winning, and they'll never realize you're the one keeping score. And that, kid, was just the beginning. I didn't just make friends, I collected them like cards I'd play when the stakes were life and death. You don't last long in this line of work without a crew you can trust. And trust, well, that's rarer than gold in our business. Most guys on the street? They'll sell you out for a pack of smokes if the mood hits them. Me, I wasn't looking for drinking buddies or muscle for hire. I was looking for pieces to a puzzle I'd been building since I was a kid, the kind of crew where every man filled a gap the other couldn't. First piece was Meyer Lansky. I told you about meeting him as a skinny kid on the street. By now, we were older, sharper, meaner, and Meyer had a mind like a safe you couldn't crack. He saw angles nobody else did. We'd sit at a cafe table in Little Italy, playing chess while the world bustled by, talking about numbers, rackets, and bootleg routes like we were discussing the weather. If I was the face of the operation, Meyer was the gears turning behind it. Then there was Benjamin Siegel Bugsy. Now, Bugsy didn't like the nickname, said it made him sound crazy. Truth was, he was crazy. The kind of crazy you wanted on your side. Quick with a joke, quicker with a trigger. He moved through a room like he owned it, talking to women like he was selling dreams, talking to men like he was handing out death sentences wrapped in velvet. If Meyer was the brains, Bugsy was the spark, unpredictable, dangerous, beautiful to watch when he was in motion. And Frank Costello, Frankie. If politics were a card game, Frankie was dealing from the bottom of the deck. He could shake hands with a senator in the morning and cut a deal with a dock boss by lunch. The man had connections you didn't even know you needed until you needed them. He taught me how to talk to men in suits the same way I talked to men in alleys, with respect, but never like I was begging. We weren't a gang. We were something else. Each of us brought a piece of the code without even knowing it. Meyer taught me patience. Bugsy taught me boldness. Frankie taught me subtlety. Our meetings weren't about showing off, they were about building something bigger than ourselves. We'd meet in dim-lit backrooms, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs drifting in while we mapped out territories, payoffs, and escape routes. Sometimes we'd just talk for hours, Logan about some poor sap who thought he could skim a few bucks off our take. Other nights, the laughter died quick when someone brought up a name we'd all been hearing, a rival making too much noise, a cop sniffing too close. That's when we'd look at each other and know, without speaking, a move had to be made. And when we moved, it was quiet. Precise. Like shadows slipping between lamplight. Thing is, people like to tell themselves that loyalty is carved in stone. But I knew better. In our world, loyalty was more like wet cement, it could set hard if you left it alone, but a strong enough push could crack it. That's why I kept my crew close, but never so close that they forgot I was the one holding the deck. Some nights, walking home through the slick streets, I'd think about what we were building. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just power. It was an empire in the shadows, a machine that could run with or without us if we built it right. But no empire comes without challengers. And soon enough, our quiet meetings and clean deals were gonna be tested. The streets were about to run loud again. And this time, the whole country was listening. Atlantic City wasn't built for saints, it was built for men like us who knew sin was the real business. The ocean's got a sound all its own. Most folks hear it and think peace, waves rolling in, gulls crying overhead, the kind of soundtrack you put on when you're trying to sleep. Me? I hear it and think of deals. Because in 1929, Atlantic City wasn't about saltwater and sunshine. It was about power. The boardwalk stretched out like a wooden crown, lined with hotels that smelled of cigar smoke and ambition. Beneath the sound of the ocean was a quieter hum, the rattle of dice behind closed doors, the shuffle of cards, the clink of glasses in rooms where the curtains stayed drawn in daylight. That spring, we came for the Atlantic City Conference. They called it a meeting, but don't picture a bunch of guys sitting around a coffee table. This was every major player in the country, Italians, Jews, Irish, all under one roof, and every one of us carried our own kind of danger. Meyer and Bugsy came with me. Frank Costello was already there, greasing palms before I'd even checked into my room. The air in the hotel was thick, not from the salt air outside, but from the quiet tension that comes when too many predators are in the same cage. We weren't there to make friends. We were there to make history. Prohibition was still in full swing, and the money was pouring in like the tide. But everyone knew it wouldn't last forever. We had to think bigger, longer, organize ourselves in a way that would outlive the booze. The talk started, slow, polite smiles, careful words, everyone pretending like old grudges didn't exist. But it didn't take long before the real conversations started behind closed doors. That's where I shined. See, here's the thing, most guys in our business can only see what's in front of them, the next job, the next score. I saw the whole board. I wasn't thinking about next week. I was thinking about 20 years from now. That's when I laid it out, we stop fighting over scraps. We divide territories clean. We run this thing like a corporation, not a street gang. Some of the old-timers didn't like it. They liked the old ways: bosses on top, soldiers underneath, constant wars to prove who's stronger. I told them wars were bad for business. You can't collect money from a dead man, and you can't run rackets in a street full of bullets. That's where the second rule came from: business over blood, always. You settle disputes with talk before you settle them with lead. If you have to pull the trigger, it's not about pride, it's about profit. Every move you make should make you richer, not just feel bigger. The Atlantic City deal meant everyone walked away with something. The Italians got their territories, the Irish got their unions, the Jews got their gambling. We even agreed to work together on certain jobs, share the risk, share the take. The meeting ended with handshakes on the boardwalk at sunset. It looked almost respectable, like we were just businessmen enjoying a seaside retreat. But under those handshakes was something sharper: the understanding that anyone who broke this peace would pay a price no one could afford. That night, I stood on the boardwalk, watching the lights of the city reflect off the water. The ocean roared like it was cheering us on. But I knew better. The ocean don't cheer. It swallows. And somewhere out there in the dark, a storm was already building. The peace we made in Atlantic City wouldn't last forever. But for now? We had something worth protecting. Some men dream about killing kings. Me? I just made sure the crown fit better on my head. Every kingdom's got a king. And in our world, that king was Giuseppe Masuria, Joe the boss. If you were Italian and making real money in New York, you either paid Joe, or you were dead. Sometimes both. Thing about Joe, he wasn't stupid, but he was old. Stuck in the old Sicilian ways, where bosses sat on thrones made of fear and every problem was solved with a bullet. That might have worked back in the old country, but here? This was America. And America ran on business. After Atlantic City, I knew the future was organization, clean deals, no endless street wars. Joe didn't see it that way. He saw it as weakness. And if there's one thing I couldn't afford, it was a boss who didn't understand the rules. So I started playing both sides. There was another power rising, Salvatore Maranzano. Slicker than Joe, sharper too, but just as dangerous. He wanted Joe gone as much as I did. So we made an understanding: I'd help take care of Joe, and when the dust cleared, we'd talk about how to run things. The day we set it up, the air felt heavy, like the city knew what was coming. We arranged to meet Joe at a little restaurant in Coney Island. It was supposed to be a friendly lunch. You ever notice how, in our line of work, friendly lunch usually means someone's not going home? I got there first, ordered the good wine. Joe came in wearing his usual nice suit, big ring, eyes that could size up a man in one glance. We talked about nothing for a while: baseball, the weather, a horse he had money on. Then I excused myself. Said I had to wash my hands. And as I stepped into the back, 4 of my guys came in through the front: Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Bugsy Siegel, and Joe Adonis. The room went quiet, except for the clink of glasses and the soft scrape of chairs being pushed back. By the time I got outside, it was done. Quick. Clean. No theatrics, no speeches, just the sound of the ocean in the distance and the gulls overhead, like the world didn't notice a king had just been dethroned. That was rule number 3, never start a war you don't know how to end. If you're gonna take a shot at the king, you better be sure he's not getting back up. With Joe gone, the city was open for business. The papers called it the end of an era. For me, it was just the start of the next move. Because I knew one thing for sure: kings don't stay dead for long in this business. There's always another crown, another head to wear it, and another man looking to take it. Some men you shake hands with and wash your hands after. When Joe Masuria hit the floor, the whole city held its breath. Some people thought it was over: the shootings, the double crosses, the bodies in the gutters. They were wrong. Because now, Salvatore Maranzano was sitting on the throne. The newspapers called him the boss of bosses. He liked the sound of it. Hell, he liked anything that made him sound like Caesar. I'll give him credit, he was a smart guy. Educated. Talked about strategy like he was command in legions. He even started calling us capos and soldiers, like we were some Roman army. But here's the thing, he was still playing the same old game Joe played: control through fear, orders from the top, everyone else just a pawn. Rule number 4, keep your friends close, and your future enemies closer. I smiled when I met with Maranzano. Nodded at his speeches. Played the good soldier. But I knew right away, this guy wasn't gonna last. See, Maranzano didn't just want power. He wanted it all: the money, the respect, the obedience. He started reorganizing the families, divvying up territories like he was dealing cards. I kept my mouth shut, but inside, I was taking notes. Every weakness, every grudge he was creating, I stored it away like chips in the bank. The first crack showed when he started calling himself the capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses. In America, that's not a title, it's a death sentence. You make yourself the top dog, you're just painting a target on your back. Maranzano didn't just paint it, he lit it up in neon. One afternoon, I went to his office. He was sitting there with a map of New York spread across his desk, moving little pins around like they were armies. "Charles," he said, "we must think like emperors. An empire must have one ruler. All others must kneel." I smiled, nodded, told him he was a genius. But inside, I was thinking, an empire with one ruler don't last long when the rest of the generals still got guns. The tension was building. You could feel it in the streets. Some of my guys started whispering, a skin if we traded one tyrant for another. I told them to keep their voices down. Not because I cared about loyalty to Maranzano, but because I wasn't ready yet. A move like this? You don't rush it. You wait until the man at the top thinks he's untouchable. And then you remind him how far he can fall. At night, I lay in bed, thinking about all the steps ahead. This wasn't just about taking Maranzano out. It was about what came after. We needed something better than this old boss of bosses nonsense. We needed a system, a way to keep the peace while still making money. That's when I started sketching the idea for something new: the commission. A table where the bosses could sit as equals. No single ruler. No single target. It would change the game forever. But first, I had to clear the board. And Maranzano? He had no idea he was about to be the first piece removed. When a man puts a crown on his own head, he's just given you a better place to aim. September 1931. The city smelled different that week, not like rain or smoke or garbage. No, this was the smell of something about to burn, and everyone knew it. Maranzano had been strutting around like Julius Caesar for months now, holding meetings in his fancy Park Avenue office, wearing silk ties, and preaching about discipline and order. To him, discipline meant everybody bowed, and order meant he gave the orders. But here's the part he didn't understand: this wasn't Sicily. New York wasn't a mountain village where one man could run the show forever. Too many families. Too much money. Too many hungry guys with Tommy guns and ambition. Rule number 5, never let one man think he's bigger than the game. The whispers started reaching me. First from Meyer Lansky. Then from Frank Costello. Finally from some of Maranzano's own men, guys who liked his Roman speeches about as much as I liked cold pasta. Then came the clincher, a quiet word from a guy I trusted on the inside: Maranzano was planning to have me clipped. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. He thought I was getting too powerful, too independent. He was right. But what he didn't realize was this: when you plan to kill a man like me, you better not give me the afternoon to hear about it. I called Meyer. We didn't need a war. We needed a surgical strike, quick, clean, no witnesses. We got some boys who could pass for detectives, suits, badges, the whole act. They'd walk into Maranzano's office like they were there to arrest him. By the time anyone figured it out, it'd be over. The city was hummin' that day, traffic horns, the rumble of the subway, the faint crackle of radios in shop windows. And up in that Park Avenue office, Maranzano was reorganizing his empire one last time. They went in around 4 o'clock. No gunfire spilled into the street, no screaming crowds. Just a few muffled sounds, the kind you hear behind a closed door and pretend you didn't. When they walked out, it was done. Salvatore Maranzano, the last man to call himself boss of bosses, was laying in his office, crown knocked clean off his head. We didn't throw a parade. We didn't take a victory lap. We just went to work. That night, I gathered the heads of the major families. We sat at a table, no thrones, no crowns, no kneel before me nonsense. I told them, from now on, there's no boss of bosses. We're equals. We got a commission. We keep the peace, we split the rackets, we settle disputes like businessmen. Some of them smiled. Some of them grumbled. But they all agreed, because deep down, they knew this was the only way to stop the streets from running red again. Maranzano had taught me the last lesson I needed: you can't rule the mob like an emperor. In this game, power don't come from sitting highest on the mountain. It comes from making sure nobody else can push you off it. And that's why the fifth rule stuck: no boss of bosses. Not in my time. Not ever again. If you want peace in this business, you don't build walls, you build a table big enough for everyone to sit at. October 1931. The air in New York had finally cooled, but the streets were still warm from all the bodies that had dropped in the past few years. Wars like the Castellamarese mess? They don't just fade away. They leave scars on the city, on the men, on the business. And if there's one thing I knew, it's that you can't keep making money if everyone's busy shooting each other. So I started thinking maybe what we needed wasn't another boss, but something different. Something bigger than one man's ego. The old-timers wouldn't like it. The young guys would love it. And me? I just wanted something that kept bullets out of my suit and money in my pocket. I called the first meeting in a back room of the Roosevelt Hotel, neutral ground, soft lighting, a couple of my boys on the door. I wanted it to feel less like a war council and more like a business merger. There they were, the heads of the major families: Joe Bonanno, Tommy Gagliano, Vincent Mangano. Al Capone sent a representative from Chicago, a sharp little guy who knew how to keep his mouth shut and his ears open. Meyer Lansky sat beside me, playing with his cigarette like he was calculating the stock market. I laid it out simple: no more boss of bosses. From now on, we got a commission. Every family's got a seat. We vote. We settle disputes without guns. We share territory fair. If somebody breaks the rules, we handle it together. They looked at me like I just suggested giving away their mothers. But then Meyer started talking about profits, about safety, about how every day spent fighting was a day the coppers got closer. And slowly, the room started nodding. We drew up the seats: New York's 5 families, plus Chicago, plus Buffalo. We put in bylaws: no family could expand without approval. No hits on a made man without a green light from the commission. All disputes handled at the table, not in the street. It was like building a new constitution for the underworld. And yeah, I knew some guys would try to skirt it, test it, push it, but the point was, we had something official now. Something that made the life look less like a blood feud and more like a corporation. By the end of the night, glasses were clinking. We weren't friends, not really, but we were partners. Partners who understood that the less heat we brought on ourselves, the more we could operate in the shadows. The press didn't know about it. The cops sure didn't know about it. But every man in that room walked out with the same thought: the rules had changed. The commission was born. And for the first time in a long time, I could see a future where we weren't always looking over our shoulders. They say a man's only as good as his word. But in our world, your word ain't worth nothing unless it's sealed in blood. I'd sat in plenty of backrooms where deals were made with handshakes, a wink, maybe a drink to close it. But the commission, this thing we'd just built, it needed more than casual promises. It needed something sacred, something nobody could walk away from without paying the price. The old Sicilian ways, they had something for that. An oath. A ceremony that made you Cosa Nostra, our thing. No press releases, no paperwork. Just a dim room, a handful of witnesses, a saint's picture in your hand, and the quiet knowledge that from this moment forward, your life didn't belong to you anymore. I remember the first time I saw it done. The kid was nervous, barely 25. Sharp dresser, smart as a whip. The boss pricked his trigger finger, a single drop of blood onto the saint's picture. The picture caught fire in a little dish, and the boss said, "May your soul burn like this saint if you ever betray the family." The kid nodded. No smile, no fear, just acceptance. That's when I knew he was one of us now. The oath wasn't just about loyalty to your boss. It was loyalty to all of us, the whole network. You betray one, you betray all. And the punishment? Let's just say nobody ever needed a second reminder. With the commission, we adopted that same sacred code, but we dressed it up a little, made it fit our corporate image. We called them gentlemen's promises. No written contracts, no lawyers, just agreements spoken in low voices, backed by the unspoken truth that if you broke one, you wouldn't live to regret it. It gave us something powerful, trust. Not the kind you read about in fairy tales, but the kind where you could hand a man $1 million in cash and know it had reached the right place without disappearing. Course, it wasn't perfect. A man's still a man, greed, jealousy, fear, they creep in. But for a while, it worked. We weren't just thugs anymore. We were an institution bound by rules no outsider could understand and no insider dared to break. They called me a boss, but I never wore the crown. That was the trick. Kings get their heads cut off, presidents get indicted, but a man who works in the shadows? He can run an empire without ever sitting on the throne. By the mid-1930s, the commission was running smoother than a Swiss watch. Every family had its slice, the unions were in our pockets, the docs answered to us, and the politicians, well, let's just say they had a funny way of forgetting who paid for their campaigns. I made a choice early on, I didn't need to be seen giving orders. I'd let the other bosses play peacock, strut around with the reporters and the flashbulbs. Me? I kept my face out of the papers and my name off the minutes. We were everywhere without being anywhere. The ports, the garment district, the nightclubs, all of it humming under our control. Truckloads of goods moving in and out of the city, every crate and every package, we got our taste. And then there was Havana. Oh, Havana, a paradise that turned into our offshore office. The hotels, the casinos wide open, no cops to bother us, and the rum was so smooth you'd forget your own name. I shook hands with presidents, smiled at movie stars, and did business with men who could topple governments before breakfast. The money poured in so fast we had to invent new ways to wash it clean: real estate, restaurants, fake companies, all just pretty fronts for a river of cash. Every dollar that passed through our hands made us harder to touch. But here's the thing about power: the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you start hearing the footsteps. Not the cops, we knew how to deal with them, but the kind of footsteps you can't bribe or threaten. The ones that come when a man in your own circle starts wondering why you got the bigger slice. Those were the golden years, no doubt. But gold's heavy, and carrying too much of it will slow you down when you need to run. It always starts with a whisper. Not a gunshot. Not a knife in the back. A whisper. The commission meetings were supposed to be sacred, neutral ground where business came before blood. But I could feel it in the air that night, something was off. The room was thick with cigar smoke, and behind every smile was a question nobody wanted to say out loud. I'd spent years building this table, making sure every man had his seat, his slice, his dignity. But greed? Greed's a funny disease. It doesn't just eat a man's soul, it makes him believe he's starving even while he's sitting in front of a feast. One of the bosses, a guy I'd bailed out more times than I could count, started throwing shade in front of the others. Not direct, no one had the stones for that, but in little digs, sideways remarks. The kind that make the other guys look at you different, even if they ain't sure why. I played it cool. Never let 'em see you sweat, that's rule number 1. But in my head, I was already counting who'd stick with me if this thing broke bad, and who'd be the first to put a bullet in me just to get a better seat. The betrayal didn't come with a bang. It came with a vote. A simple piece of paper slid across the table. A proposal to move certain business away from my guys, for the good of the commission. Translation: they were trying to bleed me slow, so I wouldn't notice till I was too weak to fight back. I signed it. Smiled. Raised a glass like it didn't mean a thing. Because sometimes the best way to win a war is to let the other guy think you ain't fighting it. Still, that night, I knew something had changed. The smoke in that room didn't just sting my eyes, it clouded everything I thought I could trust. You don't wake up one morning and realize you've lost the kingdom. No, it happens piece by piece, like bricks crumbling out of a wall you thought was solid. By 36, I was riding high. The commission was hummin', the rackets were fat, and every cop in the city knew my name, not because they could touch me, but because they couldn't. That kind of power? It makes you think you're untouchable. But there's always somebody looking to prove you wrong. The heat started small raids on the smaller joints, a couple low-level guys getting picked up. No big deal. But then Dewey came along. Thomas E. Dewey, the kind of prosecutor who smiled while he measured you for a coffin. He wasn't interested in nickel-and-dime busts. No, he was gunning for the big chair, and I was it. The papers started painting me as the devil himself, king of vice, master of every sin in the city. And the truth? We did run the show. But we ran it clean. Efficient. Nobody in the street starved unless they chose to cross us. The day they came for me, it was like watching the tide pull back before a storm. Sirens in the distance. Doors kicked in. The kind of noise that makes the neighbors press their curtains tight. I didn't run. A boss never runs, it makes you look guilty even when you are. In the courtroom, they paraded witnesses one after another, girls from the brothels, wise guys who'd flipped to save their own skins. The jury ate it up. Didn't matter if half of it was lies. When a man like me walks in, the verdict's already written. 20 to 50 years, that's what they gave me. Maximum security. For running the city too well. Prison's a funny place. You lose the walls of your world, but you don't lose the reach of your hands. I still had pulled guards who looked the other way, messages that found their way back to my boys on the street. But make no mistake, it's a slow death for a man built for motion. Every night the cell got colder. Every day the shadows of the walls felt taller. And yet, I never stopped thinking about the day I'd walk out. Because in this life, you don't write the end of my story, I do.